Jerry was a very special person. He was steady, always present.
He sort of sat back. He never had a loud voice. And when one door might close on us, he'd see that another one opened up.
Very quiet, but when he speaks, people tend to listen to him.
Dignified, knowledgeable, caring.
Nothing was too hard or too far. There was no too high up person or anything.
You know, Jerry's kind of one of those really silent but extremely important people in our field.
He's a man who is always thinking, always trying to figure out a better way to do things.
He never zigged, he always zagged.
A key figure in practically everything that happened.
He's a man who thinks about the effects of things on people.
He was just always available and in a very special, helpful way.
Jerry was there. Jerry was there for everybody.
He applied to be the executive director of the Minneapolis Association, and he was their first executive director.
I always wondered how they ever found him.
He had worked as a Chamber of Commerce person, and he worked with a civic organization for a while, but it wasn't quite his thing. And so when this came up, he applied and got the job.
Jerry was an outstanding exec for Minneapolis, and then he became executive director of Minnesota. And during my presidency, 1963 through 65, my job was really quite easy because I had Jerry as executive director and the late Dr. Franklin Smith as treasurer, and therefore had very few sleepless nights.
When he first got the job, there was a pile of books beside him on the bed because he was trying to take a crash course in retardation. And every night he'd read a little bit, and so that he became knowledgeable about exactly what he was working with.
He was told at the time he took over that job that they had enough money to pay him for about 6 months.
We told Jerry that we only had a few months to pay him, salary for him, and he had to earn his own way, and he took the job anyway.
And I just think that was just a kind of a remarkable act of faith and devotion, in a sense, that he took him up on that. And of course, what's now the Ark of Hennepin Carver is a very robust and important organization today, as is the Ark of Minnesota that Jerry then moved over to.
I first met Jerry Walsh, I think, in about 1959. It was the first light in the tunnel.
He really was a lead person in many ways, but especially among all of the executives of the parent associations, and there were many of them developing at that time. Jerry was a leader, a very strong leader.
He was our leader. He was our boss. He was our CEO.
John Holohan and Mel Heck and Jerry, I think, sort of firmed up that committee that set up buying the camp from Art Beecher, who was very active in the association.
We knew that Art wanted us to have this camp. We knew that. So that gave us an advantage, and I did the negotiating with Art Beecher, and we finally bought it for, I think it was $147,500, which included 600 feet of lakeshore, all of the equipment and all the buildings. Jerry did a fabulous job in getting the camp ready for the 1965 camping season. Harriet and Jerry and their 4 kids went out there, lived out there at Annandale on the lake all summer.
Jerry just wasn't real sure how the thing was running. So he worked every day in town and then would drive out, and we stayed out there, and the kids all kind of found their niche. And I know our youngest helped make toast every morning, and Sonny worked with the crafts, I think, that year. We all just got involved, and Jerry got home at night.
My dad would be gone during the day, and he'd come home, and we'd eat in the dining hall with the campers. It was an unusual way for a family to spend a summer, but it was a great way for a family to spend the summer. The adults would come out of the institutions to go to camp with nothing. They'd have blankets, tied up with rope, and maybe rope holding their pants up, and one change of clothes. And one camper came, his name was George Gaylord, and he had one shirt. And so when my dad was in town the next day, he bought him another shirt and gave it to the counselor to give to George. It was like 6 o'clock in the morning. There's pounding on our door. Jerry Walsh, thank you for the shirt. Thank you for the shirt.
After Dr. Walk in the 1950s, he got the first bill passed on day activity services.
He led the legislative fight to get more day activity centers and shelter workshops and other community facilities, and also to improve our state institutions.
There had never been women lobbying, and we didn't call ourselves lobbyists in the first place. We called ourselves informational specialists. And he knew how to use us.
I discovered when I started to do heavy work, that means contacting all the legislators at the state capitol during legislative time, that I couldn't cover them all by myself. And I noticed that the Nurses Association had a couple of pretty nurses, and they could get to all the legislators easily. They'd catch them, they'd call them out of the floor, off the floor and everything. I thought, we could do that. So I asked some of the women who were interested, 3 of them, Jane Burks, Sally Swallen, and Molly Warland, if they'd come over to the Capitol. And we worked together as a team. And they would make contacts, and we contacted those older men with these pretty girls, pretty women, and got a lot done.
Jerry knew his stuff. That's the other thing. He knew it backwards and forwards. And he had the guts, to just go right in there and not wait to be asked, but sort of get in there in a very unobtrusive way. They liked him, and that's important.
We started a project to take them down to Faribault and Cambridge to show them what it was like down there. We got nowhere. Nobody was interested. So we regrouped and we asked the wives down there. There was something called the Dome Club. We hired a bus and we took the wives down to see the conditions in the state institutions.
And some of them, after seeing some, couldn't go any farther. And one of them fainted. I mean, it was, and as we got on the bus on the way back, we'd stand up and say, now you've got to tell your husbands about that. With a leader like Jerry, who didn't have a child, who had the disability, and was so concerned helping other people, I felt, goodness, if he feels that way, the least we parents can do is to do absolutely everything we can.
We sort of felt like pioneers, in those days, and had a lot of wonderful people working together to try to improve conditions for the developmentally disabled.
About 1961 or so, and we went to Washington. That was fun. There was a luncheon that Eunice Shriver, who was starting the Special Olympics. It wasn't that big, maybe 100 people or something. And we had a table with about, I think there were 8 or 10 of us, John, Betty, myself, and Jerry. And we had Senator Humphrey and Eugene McCarthy. Now, this was really very exciting. And Jerry doesn't put himself between Senator Humphrey or Senator McCarthy. He puts me. And then he puts on the other side John and Betty. I mean, this is what he did. All of a sudden, in walks the President of the United States. And I tell you, it was just so exciting, we could hardly believe it.
He didn't need recognition for what he did, but he needed that the job got done. And so he was always glad to put other people in the forefront, more visible, bring people to situations in which they could have a great influence on others without him taking any credit for any of that work.
He was able to take an idea a volunteer had, and if he thought it was a good one, he just went with it. And he listened to us a lot. And he made us feel like we were professionals.
Probably the most important thing Jerry did for the United States was as a result of his trip to Scandinavia in 1966. Jerry was one of the first people to receive a Dibwad International Scholarship to travel to Scandinavia. And while there, he really became absorbed by the normalization principle that was being developed there.
During several trips to the Scandinavian countries, I was exposed to what I felt was the really excellent services provided in each area or region of Sweden and Denmark and Norway also.
Because it was at Easter time, 1966, and there was a brand new institution south of Stockholm. Just a very few had moved in. It was a place for 450, and we have been fighting not to have that new institution. Jerry and I walked around there, and it was very nice, with various buildings on the hills, and there was a little rivulet going through the village, and there was a piazza, and there was a barber shop, and there was another shop to be done, and they were all empty at the time. And then he was gone. So I went out to the men's room, but there he was washing his face. And then he burst out, "Here, you are saying what's wrong with this and that, and this and that, and that this should never have been done. And I assure you, I will never in my life see anything as good in the United States." And he was crying, this strong man. He was so upset. That's how we met. And then we started to talk.
What Jerry did really was to convince Bengt to put his principles of normalization down on paper, and then Jerry made sure that Minnesota and the entire United States learned about those, and it shaped the system.
Through Jerry, Bengt Nerier came to the United States. While he was in the United States, one of the people that came to hear him was Wolf Wolfensberger, who became an impassioned advocate for normalization, and that concept spread throughout the United States. But who's to say how it all would have unfolded without Jerry? And I think that's true of so many things.
When I came to Faribault, if I hadn't been warned through Jerry and his pictures, it would have been tougher. But now I knew what to expect. And I was terribly shocked over what I saw, especially the Dakota building with 104 into one bedroom, mostly half naked or even naked, with 3 staff. An awful smell, because the machine to get the smell out wasn't enough.
Dakota building was absolutely a horrible building. I remember they had one man who was a biter, and they were going to pull his teeth, and we stopped that. And later on, that man would be dressed in a suit of clothes and was perfectly behaviorally sound, whereas at one time he was just a mess.
There have been so many people who've done things after Jerry did them that got so much more credit for what they did. I think of Burton Blatt's exposés of the conditions in state institutions in New England, which were such a powerful factor in the development of attitudes towards institutions. But Jerry did a photographic essay of the conditions of institutions in Minnesota several years before Burton Blatt, and those had their influence in Minnesota, and I think influenced similar activities in other places. Jerry did filming of the terrible conditions in Minnesota's institutions several years before Geraldo Rivera became a national figure through his video exposés in New York. In ways like that, Jerry was before his time, but extremely important.
You know, I came to Mount Olivet Rolling Acres in 1988. After Jerry had been there for 17 years and creating just a reputation for doing the right kinds of things with people, really training many people who went on to other jobs in Minnesota to be leaders as well. Jerry knew the way things were done in the Scandinavian countries. He learned that people living not in large institutions was a better way, the normal patterns of life. And so his goal was to create that in a living setting in terms of the way people lived. He had a chance to put into practice something that he didn't otherwise. It was very easy to follow Jerry because, in fact, the quality and the reputation was there. and therefore one could just move on and build and enjoy the fruits of what he had planted.
Jerry has done an outstanding job as executive director of MARC, of MINARC, acting director of National ARC, executive director of Mount Olivet Rolling Acres, did a fabulous job there, executive director of Carver County ARC, and after he retired from ARC work, what did he do? He volunteered with the MINARC and did an outstanding job there.
It's been a whole lifelong lesson for us about teaching people with kindness and respect, and certainly learned that from my dad and from my mom too.
I used to kid him by saying that my job was to keep him here on Earth, and not to think that he was better than he was. But of course he was.
Jerry and I were very fortunate in that we happened to live and to work in a period for about half a century in which there were more changes in programs for handicapped children than had ever occurred in all of time.
I think what Jerry taught me the most is it's what happens with the people that are supported, that are considered peers, that we share life with. Therefore, the people with developmental disabilities and the staff, that is what it was about. You've got to keep that focus on the people. And he's done that all his life.
For 50 years, he's been involved in the ARC movement. I think it's a remarkable testimony to the strength of the ARC and its ability to bring people in, give them a family, and show them ways that they can influence the world at all the different stages of their lives.
I just will be forever grateful to him for what he did for other people.
I just want Jerry to know that we love him, we admire him, and from one World War II Marine veteran to another, Semper Fidelis.